Guys, welcome to another edition of the Wrestling Heroes and Insiders podcast, aka The Whip Show. You know what it is. I am Deshaun Whip Dog Whipple, and we are here with my partner,
Devastating Daryl Pace, once again in the command center here.
Devastating Daryl Pace in the command center. Daryl, how are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm feeling great. We great weather here in Michigan, and nice and hot, man. It's been fantastic. And it's been a special day as well because, for those people following the news, this is during the time of COVID, the whole COVID-19 situation. And in Michigan, this is our first non-quarantine day. Things just open up. So, man, it's exciting to be able to go outside again and leave the command center.
Perfect, man. Well, you know what? We've been doing this podcast thing for a minute, and we've had some amazing guests on. But right here, right now, see, we're just trying to get to this man's level. We got the king of wrestling interviews. This man is that guy. He is the OG of podcasting. Can you guys give it up for Mr. Hannibal from Hannibal TV? How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, but I wish I could say that the quarantine was over here because it's not yet. It looks like it's going to be going until at least July.
Oh man, where are you at, bro?
I'm from Canada, Ontario, Canada.
Yes.
Unfortunately, because I'm stuck here and it's very difficult right now for me to get to the US to do the interviews for my The Hannibal TV YouTube channel. And thank you for the nice promotion. We are the #1 wrestling YouTube channel based in Canada. We have over 115 million video views. We're beating Ring of Honor right now, MLW, NWA, and New Japan in YouTube views the past 2 months. So I'm really proud of that.
You know, I saw a video where you talked about that the other day, and I got to ask you, man. Well, first and foremost, what made you jump into the wrestling interview world, the podcasting world? Because you kind of were doing it before they were calling it podcasting.
Well, we had this channel, I guess it was kind of by accident. I had the channel originally because we have a company here in Canada called Great North Wrestling. We've been running events for 13 years now. Unfortunately, the lockdown has caused us to cancel a bunch of them. But originally, we started the YouTube channel to post matches. And then what happened was we posted a few interviews just out of old footage that we have. And we noticed that the interviews, on average, got way more hits than the matches. So then I started figuring every time we brought in a famous wrestler to wrestle for Great North Wrestling, we would do interviews with them. And it just grew from there. And now we're mainly an interview channel.
Nice. Well, Daryl, I know you had a couple things you want to ask this young man.
Well, definitely. And I'm a huge fan, Hannibal, and I appreciate what you do because I'm a huge subscriber to the channel. I follow all the wrestling podcasts, but especially yours because you get a lot of great guests and go really in depth with stuff. I know your background, so I want to kind of start there. Let's take it back before the podcast. You started off before the podcast thing as a professional wrestler, as a worker, right? So tell us a little bit, what got you into the business? What made you want to be a wrestler? How did you get started?
Well, I always wanted to be a wrestler ever since I was old enough to talk, basically. I started off in amateur wrestling. I'm a former national champion in freestyle wrestling, Olympic trials, silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. After high school, I actually turned down scholarships. I had one at the University of Buffalo for Division I NCAA, but I decided to go into pro wrestling instead. So I moved out to Calgary, started training with the Hart family, also trained with Jacques Rougeau a bit here in Canada, wrestled for Stampede Wrestling, wrestled in Puerto Rico, England, all over Canada, some parts of the US. Unfortunately, well, some of the wrestlers I'll name that I've wrestled, Psycho Sid, Kevin Nash from Michigan there, Rick Steiner, also from Michigan, Brutus Beefcake, Honky Tonk Man, Lanny Poffo, Abyss, James Storm. The list goes on and on. Harry Smith, Ted Hart, TJ Wilson I've been in the ring with. I've wrestled for WWE. I've had matches for them. I've had wrestling matches for Impact. Finally, after years and years of working on the independent scene, 8 years, I had a WWE contract, but unfortunately, when I took the medical for that contract, they found out that I had hepatitis C at the time. And what happened was I was tested shortly before this test, like within a couple years before this, and I was clean for it. So I couldn't understand how I caught it. The main guy I'd had double blood matches with that wouldn't provide me his blood work at the time was Abdullah the Butcher. It turns out he had had it for at least 10 years and was still wrestling with it and just doing that shit anyways. And in one match in particular, he had cut me with a blade he'd used on himself. So he was the one. We actually went to court in both Canada and the US. He was found guilty of negligence, assaults, and battery for passing me the disease. He never paid the judgment, but I've since been cured. It took me about 5 years to get cured. 2 treatments, went back into wrestling, wrestled AJ Styles, bunch of big matches, Gangrel, Al Snow. All of these matches are on my The Hannibal TV channel. And I realized that I guess because I had that at one point, it seemed like I was blackballed because people were holding it against me, even though I'm cured now. No one was giving me a chance because at that one time I had that medical issue. So now with how popular my YouTube channel has become, I've decided to just focus on interviews now. And I also do news updates and stuff like that on my The Hannibal TV channel.
Right. Yeah. Well, with that being said, and that's definitely unfortunate that it happened. I'm a former indie wrestler myself, so I definitely know how things can happen. If you saw Abdullah today, would there be heat, or would you be able to just say,
I would kill him. I would kill him. I would kill him if I ever saw him in person again. I would beat the living hell out of him with my bare hands. So that's why I'll avoid any convention he's ever at. But we're still pursuing him, by the way. I will never give up on that. We are still pursuing that bastard. The problem was in between getting we got the Canadian judgment, but he lives in the US. So It took 2 years to win the US trial. And in that 2 years, he transferred his properties. He had 2 very large houses. Yeah. He had one, he actually has 2 restaurants. He still has one in operation, but he closed one of the restaurants. He also owned the property of one of the restaurants. He sold the property of that. That was his main restaurant. He still has a restaurant that's located in a mall, but through various sneaky ways, he's avoided paying. But yeah, he cost me my WWE contract. So I could have technically been in WWE potentially. We'll never know if it would have gone well or not, but I would have been in WWE for potentially 11 years. Wow. He cost me my health. I was working in a group home at the time, and when they found out I had Hep C, I also lost my group home job. So he affected me in my everyday life too. So I went through about 5 years of very depressing time. The treatment that actually worked to get me cured also cost me $80,000. So I had to take out a line of credit to pay that. Right. So yeah, no, I'd hold a grudge against him.
So obviously there's still heat there, which we totally understand with that situation. But
well, he could have continued if he wanted to wrestle with Hep C. He could have continued wrestling and not bled and not cut people with dirty razor blades. Because one of the reasons we got the judgment was we know Hep C is passed by razor blades, 100%. And what happened was he cut himself with the blade, and 40 seconds later, we timed it. He cut me 5 times with the same blade. and that wasn't part of the match. I was already bleeding from my own razor blade cuts. Just two people bleeding from their own cuts. They're small cuts, blood is flowing outwards. But when you share a blade, that puts your blood directly into their body. That's why he was found to be negligent, as it's negligent knowing you have a disease and doing that. And you know, as a wrestler, that you go into a match, you don't expect someone to cut you with a blade.
No,
That's not something that you would expect going into a match.
No, that, and I'm familiar with the story and everything about it, but I wasn't aware of that piece of it, that there was no agreement between you and him as far as the blading. So when you guys walk through the match, and you walk through whatever's going to happen, and then what are you thinking when you're out there with the guy and this starts going on?
At the time, honestly, since I was already bleeding from my own cuts, and everyone's been cut shaving, you don't even really feel it. I didn't even notice until afterwards. I had seen the extra marks on my head, and at that time I was just thinking, okay, this guy, he cut me up a bit, but I wasn't thinking about the actual blood disease portion of it. That only came to me once I found out I had a blood disease.
Right. And it was because of your story that kind of stopped, because, had this not gone public, who knows how many other guys, we don't know how many other guys might have gotten affected before this and then continued after this for years. Who knows? He
stopped wrestling after I went public about that. But look at some of the guys that we know have Hep C that wrestled him. Billy Graham wrestled him. He had Hep C. Jacques Rougeau had Hep C. Yeah. He wrestled him. Bushwhacker Luke had it. He wrestled them. There's many people over the years. Bobby Jaggers wrestled Abdullah. He had it. So there's many people. They might not be able to specifically prove that he gave it to them. The one thing I had was him cutting me on tape. And I also had a blood test pretty close to the time of the match that proved that I didn't have it shortly before, whereas his tests showed that he had it for at least 10 years. So that was part of the reason I had such a good case. But the whole thing, it just cost me tens of thousands of dollars. It's not like I got anything of it other than proving for the record that he did it.
Right.
But I've overcome it. Maybe it's for the best. I am, as you said, many people would say I'm the top shoot interviewer right now. So maybe this is my true calling, and I'm moving in to other domains outside of wrestling too for my interviews. So maybe everything happens for a reason, and hopefully people think twice about, at least on the independent scene, doing double blood matches, because for $50 that you make on the independent scene, it might not be worth it. One person bleeding is one thing, but two people, maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah, man, you just hit a nail on the head. I used to get a lot of guys would say, why don't you want to do a blood match? And I never really was into it for that reason. I probably never did one in my career for that reason, because I just didn't feel comfortable, because we're not regulated, obviously, in independent wrestling.
And those indie promoters aren't paying for wrestlers to get blood tests. And I understand that, because it's hard enough to run indie shows these days with the economy to make money. So yeah, most people aren't tested. Another type of dangerous match for any indie wrestlers that might be watching it is barbed wire, because say you're thrown into the barbed wire, those spikes go into you. Then when the other guy's thrown in, those same spikes go into him. So it's very similar to sharing a blade. And of course, AEW does it now, but they're a professional company. They're testing their wrestlers, but you got to watch it on these independent shows in your local bingo hall or wherever, because no one's going to necessarily, they might not know they have it, but maybe they do, and they're just not going to say anything about it. You can't trust people.
Absolutely. Obviously, like you said, if you're on the indie scene, you want to get picked up by the major companies. So you're going to do whatever you can. You're not going to tell anybody if you got an issue, because you want to keep going. Now realize you could be a harm to other guys, because you're only thinking about yourself. And that's definitely important.
And in my case, I made the mistake of trusting Abdullah, and I was fair. I had only been in the business 4 years at that point, 4 or 5 years. So I was still fairly new and naive. So obviously if something like that happened, he never did it. He's done it, like he's assaulted lots of people in the ring in various ways over the years, but it's never the veterans. It's always the younger wrestlers that, you know, there's like a totem pole and you have to respect the veterans. You can't really snap off on a veteran if they do something unusual just because of the way the wrestling hierarchy works.
Right. Well, I do want to transition a little bit into when you started interviewing guys. Because like I said, you're the blueprint for a lot of us. When you started, they didn't have a million guys doing this podcast thing like you're doing. I mean, like I said, you're beating tons of different actual full companies doing this. When you start interviewing guys, when you first started, were the guys receptive to breaking kayfabe and telling their story, or they want to still stay in character and talk to you? How are you able to get them comfortable with you as an interviewer to do interviews with you?
Well, when I started, I was mostly interviewing my friends or wrestlers that I had used in my Great North Wrestling Company for numerous years. So just like Sid, who you have in the background there from one of my interviews, I wrestled Sid back in like 2008. So I'd known him since 2008. So I'd already known him for like 10 years by the time I did my first interview with him. Honky Tonk Man I'd known for a long time. But I think because I am a wrestler, I kind of have that mutual respect. So it's not like I'm someone that hasn't been in the wrestling business asking them those hard questions, and they're more open to it a lot of the times. And then there was some in my early days, like there's one with Honky Tonk Man where we're driving back from an event that we never expected. Now it's got thousands of views, but actually my main interview with Honky Tonk Man, I have one 3-hour interview with him up right now that has over 3 million views, which I think might be one of the highest viewed shoot interviews of all time, especially considering it's 3 hours. But there's one interview I did with Honky Tonk Man. We're driving back, drinking in the back of a van. So I think he was open that day to open it up because that was an afternoon show. I think he started drinking at noon. And then by the time we drove home, actually after the show, there was a bar that bought him a bunch of free drinks. Then we took a van to another bar that was an hour and a half away in the town where he was flying out of. So some of the times, some of those wrestlers had a few drinks and were more open for those reasons.
Honky Tonk Man is one of my favorites. Lanny Poffo, because those are two guys. Honky Tonk Man's been doing this for a long time. I think he's one of the first ones that when he did these interviews, he went a little negative, right? But I mean, he was just kind of open about it. And I know him and Lanny Poffo just, again, he's going to talk about anything. There it is.
There's actually one interview I did with Lanny Poffo that was by far the best interview he ever did in his life, but it'll probably never come out because when he did it, it was back one of my first interviews done around the same time that famous Honky Tonk Man was done, but it was before he got back on good terms with WWE. Oh. So he does not want it out. Unfortunately, I recorded that with a camera. Now I record it with my own cameras, but when I started, I would hire camera crews, and there was an issue getting the footage of that. There's a 3-hour Lanny Poffo interview out there, and like he even talks about the Stephanie McMahon Macho Man stuff on there. But because he's now on good terms with WWE, he never wants that released, and it would be very difficult to ever get that released. But that's one of the ones that I'm upset that will never go to public. And it's unfortunate for him because it would actually get him over, but because now I guess he probably receives Macho Man's royalties, he wants to maintain on good terms with WWE.
Oh man, I get it. Trust me, I get it. With that being said, you know, because like I said, we interview guys just like you do. And when you do that, guys have to feel comfortable with you. with that being said, how often does that happen, what you just stated with Lanny Poffo, where they tell almost too much and then they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. How often does that happen? They're like, well, don't put that out there. Edit it and just then put that part. Does that happen to you?
It happens sometimes, and there's been other occasions where people have said stuff about wrestlers that are in WWE or told stories about WWE where various WWE agents have contacted me and asked me to take down the videos. So it has happened. So it really depends who it is. I don't think there's been any time yet where someone's asked me to take down a video where I haven't. I don't think so. But when they know what they're saying when they agree to it.
Right.
So it's kind of their problem, but out of respect for them, I will usually take it down. It's happened a bunch of times. I mean, I'll tell one story because I don't think Steve Regal's going to see it, but I did an interview with Ted Hart where he talked about Steve Regal doing something I won't even say it, doing something underhanded with him. And Gerald Briscoe, through his son Wes Briscoe, told me that Steve would like that to please be taken down. So I took it down just out of respect to Steve Regal. He didn't want that brought back into light.
Yeah.
We all know he had his drug problems back in the days. I mean, I think he was released by WWE and WCW at various times due to all of his personal issues. I think the funniest story about Regal, and he's told this story, is like he acted out on a plane once and they ended up like making an emergency stop in Alaska, and he was blacked out at the time, so he woke up in an Alaskan prison. And he's like, I wasn't going to Alaska. What the hell happened?
Wow.
Yeah. But this one was a little worse that Ted had told, but yeah. It's funny because you could imagine you're getting on a plane, you take your pills or whatever, then you start drinking, and then you just black out. All of a sudden you realize you've freaked out the whole plane and they've made an emergency landing.
And a question. Now, I know you traveled, you trained in Canada, you trained with the Hart family.
Yeah.
Anybody that knows this show, big Hart family fan, I talk about the Dynamite Kid in every show, I talk about Bret Hart. When you're working and you've seen these guys, like who were you drawn to? What style? Like what kind of, what type style? What, if you can name your Mount Rushmore, what's the kind of style that you're really into?
Well, I think the style that I did as a wrestler is like the Stampede wrestling style was kind of like a strong style, Japanese style. They had a lot of Japanese wrestlers out there. And the way we were trained in the dungeon was a very hard-hitting, realistic style of wrestling. So that's the style of wrestling I did. You'll never see me do a stomp punch or slap my thigh when I do a kick. I actually connect with my stuff. So maybe some people didn't like that style, but that's the style I always did. And as far as wrestlers, I patterned myself off of no one specific. I think I took something from everyone I've trained with. I've trained with Bruce Hart, as I said before, Rougeau, Lance Storm a little bit, Bill DeMott, Dave Taylor, Harley Race. I spent 2 weeks training with Harley Race. Tom Pritchard I've trained with numerous times. So yeah, I have a lot of training. I just take elements from everybody and kind of do my own style, but it's definitely the hard-hitting style of wrestling.
Do you know and when you first signed with the WWE, do you know what their plans were? Like what they're looking for out of you, what they're considering you for? Was it NXT at the time? Like what was
it was FCW. At the time, it was Florida Championship Wrestling. And all I know is that everyone told me this, and I saw it from Pat Patterson himself, was that apparently Pat Patterson at the time was really quote unquote high on me. And he said that I was the best heel he had seen in a long time. And then I heard from other, when they actually called me, Johnny Ace, the one question he asked me was, why are you better? Could you tell us why you're better than Mike Knox? So it's like, that was an unusual question, but it made me think that Mike Knox was on his way out at that time. Maybe they would have had me in like a heel role similar to his, but maybe I would have done better. But yeah, the one story from when I was hired was I had had a bunch of tryouts. I'd had like 14 WWE extra jobs before I went to the actual week-long tryout camp. But in those days, they rarely looked at you. It's not like today where there's such a there's a deficit of talent. So back in like from 2004 to like 2006 when I was getting my extra jobs, they weren't looking for talent as much. So often you would just go back there as an extra and have nothing to do. Yeah. And they wouldn't look at you or do anything. I did have two matches, one on SmackDown against Heidenreich, one on Heat against Eugene. But the only feedback I got from those was good, keep at it. So finally, when I got invited to this tryout camp in 2009, I could tell from the very first day that they were like showing more interest in me. AJ Lee was also in that, Darren Young, Mason Ryan, and I think Adam Rose was also hired from that camp. But I could see right away they were making me wrestle every day. And then on the fourth day, it was a 5-day camp. What happened was Pat Patterson was only going to be there for the morning of that camp. And we were separated into 3 groups. And Patterson was in the group where they were doing matches. And Dusty was there, Steve Kern, Tom Pritchard. I think Mr. Kennedy was actually also there. I was in a different room. I wasn't in the room where they were having matches. But I remember one of the agents came in and said, we want Pat Patterson to see you wrestle. So I knew at that point they were looking at me for WWE. But the problem with that match was they just picked a random guy for me to wrestle with. And this guy had very little training. He sucked, and he kept punching me in the ear, like legitimately punching me in the ear. Wow. So I still pulled off a good match, but at one point in that match, I lost my hearing for like 10 seconds. So to be professional, first of all, I started it off with a promo, and my promo before that match was so good. Dusty Rhodes came out of his office and said, "Hey, everyone, just so you know, that's how you do a promo." He actually said that in front of the whole camp. So, but basically, I had the match. The guy kept punching me in the ear. So after the bell rang, the bell ringing at the end kind of like caused some ringing in my ear. And I just absolutely lost it on this guy and like basically told him to go out in the parking lot in front of everybody. And I was like basically challenging him to a fight because I was furious. So they actually at that point broke for lunch. There was a lot of tension in the air. And Pat Patterson pulled me off and took me, he smokes. He took me for like a little walk outside of the building while everyone was having lunch. Talked to me. He said, "Hey, you kind of screwed it up there. It's okay to have," they didn't understand I lost my hearing temporarily. They just saw me as like, okay, this guy's crazy. He's going to be challenging people to fights. So Patterson took me to the side, talked to me, said he saw a lot in me, but I can't show that in a tryout situation. He's like, it's okay to throw those tantrums once you're up there once in a while, but you can't do that in these situations. He's like, I'm going to stick around. I'm going to give you one more match after lunch. And he gave me a finish that, funnily enough, it involved me kind of snapping after the match again, but it was fake. He did this because he wanted to play a rib on the people. So they found me a good opponent. They went out of their way to find me a good opponent. And if you remember, I said earlier, Patterson was only staying until lunch. So he actually waited through the lunch and then watched my match after lunch. It went well. I did his finish. Everyone kind of bought that I was actually bad again. But then they realized that that was just part of the finish Pat had given me. Pat came up to me. He said, "Good job. Hope to see you in WWE," something like that, and left. He didn't watch any more of the matches after lunch, and they didn't look at me again at all on the Friday. That was the last they actually looked at me. So it was pretty clear at that point that I thought I was going to get hired. But the other funny thing is about that conversation I had with Johnny Ace when he asked me if I was better than Mike Knox, or why I was better than Mike Knox. The last thing Steve Kern, who was running FCW at the time, said to me before we left on the Friday was, "Hey man, don't worry. We all go off the handle sometimes. Nobody's going to say anything to the office about what happened. We all want you to get a job." And then the first thing Johnny Ace said when they called me was, "What the hell happened with that fight thing at FCW?" So obviously they did tell the office. So to answer your question, I believe they did see something in me and did have plans, because we all know Pat Patterson has a lot of pullback there, and it seemed like he was the main reason I got hired. Mind you, I saw him at the Cauliflower Alley Club last year, and he had no recollection of me. So he sees talent all the time over the years, so he didn't remember any of that. But as a talent, of course, that's going to be like a significant moment in your life, that whole experience.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. You're right. You know, they see so many guys. But with that being said, what is your current relationship with the WWE? Obviously, you were, like you said, you were a worker. You told the story. But now that you're doing these interviews, and like you said, some of the interviews, people saying stuff that WWE might not like. They obviously know who Hannibal is, even if it's just from the interviews. Where do they stand with you?
Well, as I said, that Regal story is not the only one that they've had taken off. I am friends with various producers in WWE, but the company in general doesn't like me, I don't think. Someone in the company doesn't like me. In 2016, as I told you, I got cured in December 2014. That cure has been confirmed many times. At one point in time when I was still wrestling, I had like a match that was scouted by Jim Ross and Gerald Briscoe. And Gerald Briscoe told me after the match he's going to recommend me to WWE. So did Jim Ross. But unfortunately, it took some time, but they finally did recommend me to WWE, and they got a tryout set up. I was in talks with WWE for about 7 weeks. They were talking to me every week. And they even sent me my itinerary for my NXT tryout. They were going to fly me to Orlando and everything. This was in May of 2016. Now, like about a week before the tryout, everything seemed to be going well. I got a message from somebody from Talent Relations who I'd never heard of before. I forget the name, but I still have the email. They said, "We're sorry to inform you that you're no longer invited to the tryout." And I'm like, what? What the hell is all this bullshit? So then I messaged Briscoe about it, who had been the guy recruiting me. And of course, Briscoe recruited Brock Lesnar and many others. And Briscoe said, they don't tell us the reasons why. They keep that confidential, but they did tell us that you were uninvited. All they said was they already had information on you. So somebody higher than Briscoe on the command chain cut my tryout. I don't know what happened, but somebody obviously doesn't like me higher up. As I said, I give my true feelings on them. People say how they feel about them in my interviews. So they may or may not like me. Some of the people in the company do like me, others don't. But it's safe to say I will, in all likelihood, never work for them for whatever reason. I'm gonna guess it's someone high up that like Triple H that probably doesn't like me because I know Vince McMahon doesn't have a clue who I am.
And it's crazy because as time has gone on, they've seemed to get their arms more around podcasts. You know, originally I don't think they did. I probably understood what it was. And then you see Steve Austin and Jericho have, and it seemed like one time they were going to have a podcast network or something going on, and it just seems like it's never, you know, come to fruition. And you think right now, when people can't work anyway, this would be a great opportunity to. I mean, there's so many talent that they have under contract, so many legends that no one else can talk to, but they can. To not have something set up and take that forward is just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I like working for myself better anyways, but of course, as you guys know, if you have a YouTube channel, your YouTube pay varies from month to month. So of course, if someone ever offered me like a regular pay that was for a significant amount to do the same thing I'm doing, where I don't have to stress out how much am I going to make this month, it would be great. But I see my viewers are going up every year. Even we've had huge growth just in the past since the lockdown. As bad as the lockdown has been, it's really increased my growth of my channel. So I'm doing fine, and I don't think I'd want to work for them anyways, just because they produce you so much. They'd probably give you the questions, and they'd be the ones editing the interviews. So as I said, you never say never. For the right money, anyone will agree to anything because it is the wrestling business, but I wouldn't expect that. And for whatever reason, maybe, as I said, it's because I once had Hep C. I don't know. But you would think, considering the amount of views I have and my experience in wrestling, and I'm a good wrestler. By all accounts, I'm a good wrestler and I'm big. Before this lockdown, the gyms have been closed now for 3.5 months. But before this lockdown, I was 293 pounds and muscular. Now I'm probably about 265, 266. Wow. But like, it seems like for a Ring of Honor or a lower company like the MLW, and it's a good quality but lower, you'd think some of those companies would reach out to me. But for whatever reason, it seems like they don't want to reach out to me, even though I have a great following. They'd rather hire people that are unknown and don't have the physique or the experience I have. So explain that one to me. I don't know.
Yeah, because like I said, I've been in the business, and unfortunately, as we know, this business is crazy. You never know. I mean, yeah. I used to always say, even in myself, that you can't count nothing until it's signed, sealed, and delivered with this business. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's why I like being in control of my own destiny. And as I said, my company, Great North Wrestling, has been around for 13 years. It's also doing well. So I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I'm a producer there. I'm the one that is pretty much the only agent that puts everything together for that company. So I get my little taste of the wrestling business still on those events.
Now going back to the interviews itself, I like to ask this question, but I try to make it a little broader so it's easier to answer. If you were to pick the top 3 Hannibal TV interviews a person should watch, name them top 3 interviews you would tell people to watch right now.
Well, from a sheer entertainment standpoint, and this isn't in any order, the Marty Jannetty one was it's funny. It's one of the funniest ones out there.
Yes.
The Honky Tonk Man 3-hour one is good, but if you click on that one and then go to the comments, at the top of the comments, last year I did a revised one where I fixed the audio a bit, because when we recorded that, the company I used didn't mic me. So we have a fixed audio version of my 3-hour Honky Tonk Man one. That one, as I said, has 3 million hits, which I think is a record for a 3-hour shoot interview. And all of the Sid ones are good, but let's say the Sid one that you have behind, I think every day I get comments about the Sid interview. So Sid Vicious's interview with Hannibal TV, I think, is a pretty good one. He's honest. And I think he gets a bad rap in the business. There's a lot of jealousy against him. But Sid's a good guy, and he was very talented. Things just the cars just weren't in his ball court, but he's very well off financially. He owns a landscaping company now. He's doing great.
Nice. You know, and that's one of the things that I love about these, because when you did see it, you know, you find out a lot more about that. You know, he was putting things together behind the scenes. You know, he was doing some booking. It was, you know, when you think of Sid, I was just thinking of, you know, Sid, but I wasn't aware of all the stuff that else he was doing.
He got Harlem Heat hired. Yeah, as you said, he had power behind the scenes. Unfortunately, I think the whole situation with Arn Anderson killed that, but that was both of their faults. And Arn Anderson was the first one to bring the scissors into play there. Everyone acts like, oh, Sid went crazy and stabbed them. Well, Sid got the scissors from Anderson. Yeah. So, like, Sid was just protecting himself, but they're both lucky that there was no charges laid in that. I don't think in today's social media world, that thing would have been brushed under the table so quickly.
You know, and nowadays, you know, they've got, I know on YouTube, they've got like Behind the Titantron, and then on TV, we got the Dark Side of the Ring. I mean, and you've interviewed tons and tons of people. Have you thought about, you know, going deep into a situation, you know, like they have, and they might even be pulling your clips for some of your interviews as well, because I know you did Kelvin Sullivan. So I mean,
oh yeah,
thoughts about you know, doing a deep dive into more of a tragic situation like that?
Well, what I have done lately is I've done some compilation videos, and I have a whole playlist of compilation videos where I cut like all the wrestlers. You mentioned Kevin Sullivan. Everyone's speaking about the Chris Benoit murder. So there's like a video of like 15 people talking about the Chris Benoit murders. There's one about the Montreal Screwjob. There's one about steroids in wrestling. So I do those type of videos. Would I ever do like a movie episode type thing? Maybe, but that requires a lot of work. So I don't know. It's not that I don't like work, but like I'm not a trained editor. I've done my own editing. As I said, I went to wrestling right after high school. I only have a high school education, so I don't know if I would go into actually making an episode out of something unless I was hired by a company. Actually, coincidentally, someone from, I'm not going to say it, but like a producer from South Carolina recently talked to me about doing something like that, where they would fund like a behind the scenes story documentary type thing, but I would be the interviewer for and help produce. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Probably won't, but a situation like that could happen where I would be like a producer and help put something like that together.
Now I gotta ask you this, man. As you know, like I said, you're one of the OGs in the game of podcasting and interviewing. There's a million people that do podcasts now. You know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What would you tell one of these young guys out here that wants to start a podcast or they doing a podcast about the grind? Because of course they think, well, all I'm going to do is watch Raw, SmackDown, and AEW Dynamite and talk about it, and I'm going to get 1 million followers. And it's, obviously, you know, it's a lot more than that. It's just like it's like working at 95. You work. What would you tell if you were to give some inspiring words to those guys?
Well, it is work. I other than my breaks I take from working out, I work on my channel pretty much every hour that I'm awake. If it's not editing or doing an interview like this, promoting it, I'm watching interviews about someone I'm about to interview so I can find out, where I'm reading one of their books or I'm listening to podcasts that they've been on, so I cannot ask the same questions or maybe take a different spin on the same questions. So it's just a lot of work. It's not easy, but I like it. You have to like it. So I would say, unless you're planning on just doing it for fun, if you want to do it full time, it is a full-time job. but it's a fun full-time job for someone like me because it allows me to keep in the wrestling business. For someone like me, I read the news anyways. I'd be following it as a fan that's interested in the behind the scenes working anyway. So I've just turned it into a job, but it is a lot of work. It's not easy, and you got to promote yourself. And I would say there's some people that do this. If you're going to take somebody's clips or use a quote from one of their interviews, have the respect to at least give them credit, because there's nothing worse than when they don't do that. It's disrespectful. Even Steve Austin has done it at least 3 times. He has shouted me out on his Al Snow podcast, Duke the Dumpster Drosy, and Tom Pritchard podcasts. He said that he watched my interviews for research, and when he brought up some subjects that I brought up in my interviews, he's mentioned it. So if someone as big as Steve Austin can do it, everybody can do it. And I've had some people that have just like taken my clips, and as you know, it's difficult to get interviews. Sometimes you got to pay the people. It's hard work. And when someone just takes it without asking you, that's very rude. So at least have the decency to ask the person. They're probably going to say yes.
Wow. Now, you touched on something, so we got to go here before we leave, man. Paying people for interviews. I will say this. When we started this show, we were blessed, just like you said earlier, my connection to the business, I was blessed. A lot of guys felt comfortable talking with me. You know what I'm saying? We reached out to a lot of guys. And I actually have a podcasting, I call him my godfather. Shout out to Steven Joyner out of LA. He kind of was like got me together on this podcasting thing. He was on the faith that you don't pay anybody. And I'm not going to say any names, but it's funny because some guys you would assume might want some money, they do it for free. But some of the guys that you're like, oh, he'll do it, they're like, no, I want $200 or whatever. How do you feel about that, man? Should you pay guests to come on a podcasting show?
Well, as I found out, like even in the TV industry, they pay people for interviews. People like those, a lot of the people were wondering why Kevin Sullivan didn't appear on Dark Side of the Ring. Did anyone ever figure out that maybe they didn't just reach the money he wanted? Because everyone on Dark Side of the Ring is paid, for instance. And when you appear on TV documentaries, there's usually pay involved. So as I said, it really depends if you're friends with the person. Obviously, they're going to either give it to you for free or give you a deal. The bigger stars that don't know you, that don't need the publicity, of course, they're only going to do it for money. And as I said, when I started, I was lucky because I was using most of these guys for wrestling anyways. So because I'm a promoter of wrestling, they want me to use them again. So they'll do an interview with me as part of their wrestling deal. But yeah, I mean, a guy like Sid, he's a busy guy and he's already rich. Why is he going to take time out of his day to talk to a random person that might only get 20 hits for free? Like, it is a business. And podcasters also make money. I even know that when Chael Sonnen had Vader on his podcast all those years ago before Vader passed, Vader's another guy I did an interview with too. I mean, I know Chael paid Vader. So even the top podcasters pay.
Right.
So I got a question. It's kind of.
I will say one thing though, just before you go any further.
Yeah.
Some of the MMA people and the real fighters are way less selfish than wrestlers. Wrestlers, on average, are some of the greediest people out there. Yeah. And some of them have no idea. Like, as you guys probably know, some people think that podcasting is very lucrative, even at the low levels. But like, say a video gets 5,000 hits, that's literally change. That's literally like 50,000 hits, I think might be $10 if you're lucky. Right. So it takes a hell of a lot to make a lot of hits. That's one of the reasons why I cut up my interviews, because if you just post the full thing, it's in all likelihood not going to make its money back. And I do have some interviews that have not made their money back. Some have just broke even, and you never know who's going to do good and who's going to do bad. I'll be honest, the one that I thought was going to do really good and still hasn't made its money back was my Tito Ortiz interview. I was thinking, oh, he's such a celebrity. He's going to get tons of hits. But surprisingly, I did an interview with Tank Abbott that same week, and Tanks blew Tito's away. So you never know who's going to do good.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, man. And I didn't want to go here, but since you brought it up, I'm going to go here. Surprisingly enough, we've interviewed people from every promotion pretty much they have in our 10, 11 weeks. But some of the Impact guys have got more hits. Impact Wrestling, which obviously we know where Impact Wrestling is on the total poll right now, have got more hits than some of the guys that I just knew were going to be out of here. You know what I mean? So sometimes you never can tell. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it also makes a difference, and it's very hard to do this, is if you get people to share. A lot of the bigger stars, they'll even say that they'll share it, yet very few of them actually do. But when you're negotiating with them, they're like, oh, I'll share every clip. Yeah. Rarely happens. There's only some that do. So as you're saying, those Impact guys, they're lower on the totem pole. Maybe they just want the publicity. They'll share it more so their fans will watch. That could be one, and maybe they'll talk a little bit more controversial, or elaborate a little more, because if you have somebody, I recently did an interview with Bagwell, who appeared to be on pills or something during the interview because he was a little out of it, but his answers were at least detailed. Yeah. Where I'd rather have that than somebody like Carlito, for instance, that gave a one-sentence answer for all of my questions. So there's no way of knowing, unless it's someone with a track record. Like, I could tell you right now, if I did another interview with Sid, it would do well, and I would like to do another one. But for someone I haven't interviewed, there's no way of knowing whether it'll do well or not.
So a twist on a question I always ask, because you've had to build the benefit of working in the business with folks and now on the podcast. Who are your kind of your markouts? Like, where I'm in the ring with this guy and I can't believe it, or you've got somebody in your podcast that goes, oh my gosh, I finally got this guy.
Honestly, I haven't. Maybe I'm working on the Jesse Ventura one. That is going to be one of the ones I've always wanted, but I haven't really interviewed someone that I really could say I'd mark out over. I'm really interested in UFO, so surprisingly, there's some people in the UFO domain that I might mark out over more than wrestling. But Jesse Ventura, he's one of my goals, and I'm really hoping to get him this year. I would definitely be marking out for him. As far as being in the ring with, let's see here. Well, I've done an angle with Haku. Unfortunately, due to a problem with his work visa, the match didn't work out, but I'm a big Haku fan, so the little segment we did, it has over 100,000 views on my YouTube channel. Hannibal confronts Haku or something like that. I'm a huge fan of his, so that segment with him was good. The Terry Funk altercation I had, that's on YouTube. There's tons of versions of it that have hundreds and hundreds of thousand hits. That's another guy that I really looked up to that I got to work with. So those two would be up there for sure.
Nice. And on that, I got to ask the follow-up. Who is the toughest man in the business?
It would have to have been Terry Funk. He would be the toughest wrestler in the business, for sure. I would be up there for the current crop from the modern day as far as two things. The ability to take punishment and do crazy stuff, but also the ability to actually defend myself. So I would say that's up there, where you have like a Mick Foley, who was never really known as a fighter and probably was never in too many fights, but he could take a lot of punishment. And that's a talent in this business, being able to absorb punishment. I told that to somebody once. You could take a beating. If you're in this business and you want to cry over little things, I don't think you're going to go that far. Although there's a lot of them in WWE today.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna go past that. But before we get out of here, and normally I'm gonna be honest, we don't like to do the controversy thing here. We just kind of interview guys and sign them up. But we did ask you who were your favorite interviews, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask this: is there one or two that you were like, yeah, this ain't it?
I think my least favorite one was one that I did last year with Juventud Guerrera. And I'll explain why. He's not someone I would have sought out to go after, but there was a company using him on a show in my town that I'd reached out to do an interview with. And he agreed, and he wanted the same money that he made for the match that night. So I agreed to it because he was in my town. I wouldn't have traveled to Mexico City to interview him. But you know what? He wasn't bad in WCW, so why not? First of all, he was going to do it right after the show. He was going to go back to a studio I have here in this town to do it, so it'd be good quality. Because people always complain when there's quality issues. So it's like, okay, the studio was like half an hour away from where the show was. So it wasn't that far a drive, and we were going to drive him right back to his hotel after. He waited around 2.5 hours after the event before he left. And his match was before intermission. And during that time he's waiting around, he's like, well, can't we just do the interview here? And I'm like, you agreed to do it at the studio, so we didn't bring the camera equipment here. I'm not going to drive half an hour back to get my camera equipment, come here, then an hour is going to pass, and then only to have it in a building where there's an echo and there's people walking around. And then he said, well, I'm hungry. Can we just do it at a restaurant and we'll do it while I'm eating? I'm like, no, but I'll buy you dinner if you want to have dinner. Okay, so then he finally gets out of the building. I don't care if you smoke weed or not. Actually, the promoter said if you want to get on his good side, bring him a few joints. So I brought him a few joints. Then he wanted to smoke in somebody's van. So that took another 10 to 15 minutes. Then he made a big deal that he wanted alcohol. But where I live in Canada, the liquor stores close at 9. So there was no ability to get alcohol. He wanted beer. Finally, I found someone that had wine. We had wine at the house for him, or I think it was champagne, actually. So the interview, the agreement was for an hour. He was like avoiding the questions, not giving really great answers. People can watch it and see for themselves. Everything's great. His answer to everything is everything's wonderful now. I'm such a positive person. And then about half an hour into the interview, he starts literally tapping his foot on the ground, to say, when is this going to be over?
Wow.
So just giving short answers, tapping his foot. He went through 3 pages of questions in about 50 minutes. He didn't go the full hour. We ended up putting a match of his at the end that a promoter let us post.
Yeah.
But then on the way home, I got him his dinner too and everything. So I just found he was a pain to deal with. And then after, we didn't get good feedback on the interview. So that was the most annoying guy to deal with, because I even told him, I think I told you he waited 2.5 hours after the show. I even told him after about half an hour, hey, if you don't want to do it, it's cool. I'll just go now. It's no problem at all. But he said, no, I want to do it. But no. Anyways, bad experience. And I gave him his money before he did the interview and everything. So he knew there wasn't going to be any problems with pay. But I found tapping your foot, that's just pretty disrespectful. And at least try to give good answers. But whatever. He's off my list for a follow-up interview.
Wow, it's funny you said that. Because Hannibal, we do got to get out here. We know you got to go on back to live your life, man. But I'm going to tell you, we're going to have to bring you back for season 2 because we got some more in-depth questions about specific interviews. But Daryl, you got anything else for me you want to hit him with before we get out of here?
Man, there's so much. I'll leave with this one quick question. Who is the most insane person you've had the pleasure of meeting?
Meeting?
Or working with, on either on podcast or in person.
Oh God, there's so many. I might be up there as one of them myself because I have that side to me. But there's a lot of them. I would say Teddy Hart has got to be up there. Now he comes to mind, but there's more. And as I said, I'm in that category too. I have that side to me, but just from his ideas and his thoughts on life and his personality in general, he's got to be up there. But there's others.
Wow. Yeah, Teddy Hart name come up quite often around here.
I try not to talk about him that much anymore because I really want him to get over some of his latest issues, and I hope he can get through that and make something of himself again.
For sure. Well, like I said, Hannibal, thank you very much for kicking it with us, man. We had a great time. And like I said, you're awesome. We really do want to bring you in for season 2. But right now is our final segment of the show. And for this segment, it's called Ring the Bell. When we ring the bell, you have 60 seconds to say whatever you want to talk about. You can promote yourself. You can say something inspirational. You can just say something off the wall. But Hannibal, from Hannibal TV, you got 60 seconds. Ring the bell.
Well, I got to tell everyone to subscribe to the Hannibal TV on YouTube. All my shoot interviews are posted on there in full free. We're also on Patreon, where we post our interviews ad-free before they go in full on YouTube. That's patreon.com/The Hannibal TV. Instagram and Twitter at The Hannibal TV. My personal Twitter is at Devon Hannibal, DEVONHANNIBAL. TheHannibalTV.com is our website with everything on there, all the information, TheHannibalTV.com. And we have a podcast on iTunes too, the Great North Wrestling Podcast. The link to that is also at TheHannibalTV.com. So check all that stuff out. Subscribe, follow these guys. They have a good start on things, and follow all the Great North Wrestling wrestlers too. We have Davey Boy Smith Jr., the Hannibal TV champion, Jeremy Prophet, Canadian champion, Lufisto, women's champion of Canada. We have the Blood Hunter, one of the best up-and-coming stars, who just won against Sabu. So many great wrestlers. Check it all out, including the very first Great North Wrestling cinematic match on the Hannibal TV. Check it out. Amber Nova versus the Ninja intergender match. Check that one out. I'm very proud of that one.
You heard what it is, man. Follow them. Hannibal TV, like I said earlier, this man is the OG of this YouTube interviewing podcasting game. There ain't nobody else. We just trying to be like him. You heard it right here. But guys, we're going to get ready to get out of here. You know what to do. Check out our pages on Instagram at The Whip Show Podcast, Facebook, The Whip Show Podcast, and on YouTube, The Whip Show Podcast, the Wrestling Heroes and Insiders. Check us out. Listen to all our other shows. And if you want to be a sponsor, hit us up. You see, we got amazing guests each and every week. So why wouldn't you? But you know what? We're going to get on out of here. I am Deshaun Whipdog Whipple.
Devastating Daryl Pace.
And we got Hannibal.
One last comment for you, Sean.